Hi, my name is Ken Fleischmann. I'm a professor in the School of Information at the University of Texas at Austin, the iSchool. I am the founding director of our Bachelor of Arts and Bachelor of Science in Informatics, our new undergraduate informatics major that I'll talk more about a little bit later in the webinar. I'm also the founding chair of Good Systems UT Grand Challenge. Of course, this particular webinar is a collaboration between Good Systems UT Grand Challenge, the Institute for the Foundations of Machine Learning, and the Texas Advanced Computing Center. So really happy to have you here and to get to interact after this talk. I'll be talking about AI in society. So the focus of Good Systems is on the ethical implications and societal implications of AI and trying to ensure that AI will make a better world for everyone, make more equitable and more just world. And so that's the focus of what we'll be talking about exploring today. So I'll start with a pretty simple question. Is AI good or bad for society? And this is a very simple question. So it's lacking a bit of nuance. So we'll go into a bit more detail here. This question of good or bad, though, I mean, it's a simple question, but it's one that's been challenging for humans to try to resolve for thousands of years. So we can go back in time, just for example, to ancient Egypt. Of course, in many different societies around the world have had different metaphors and different approaches for understanding good versus bad, good versus evil. But the particular instance that the Egyptians used was a scale to measure the weight of a heart relative to the weight of a feather, as a question of whether or not the heart was pure. We still use the metaphor of scales today in many courtrooms around the world, and other institutions where law and justice are carried out. So it's a common metaphor, a fairly utilitarian metaphor. And you'll see many instances, again, across many different cultures around the world where there are different ways of understanding good versus bad, how to measure it, how to evaluate it. So that's just in terms of human behavior. We're very complex beings. It's hard to come up with some universal moral laws that everyone can agree with. That's the Kantian perspective. So then in terms of technology, we can move to Kranzberg's first law of technology. And Kranzberg states that technology is neither good nor bad. So that sort of answers that first question, but not in the way you might expect, nor is it neutral. So he's arguing that it's not that technology is value neutral and doesn't matter, that it does. It just matters differently to different people in different situations and circumstances. So it's a far more complex valence and impact of technology than simply saying all technology is good, all technology is bad, or all technology is neutral. Technology can be used in some cases, very insidious ways. So this is one example from American history. Of course, we have, unfortunately, many examples of racism, sexism, classism, and other forms of discrimination, inequity, and injustices in society. And this is believed to be one of them. So this is the Southern State Parkway that leads to Jones Beach, which at the time that this parkway was built, was seen as a pretty exclusive area in a very, unfortunately, racist and classist way. And so the architect who was involved in designing this parkway, as well as the overpasses to the parkway, Robert Moses, who was very involved in a lot of the architecture of New York City area, had some pretty problematic views. And it's now believed designed the overpasses of the parkway to be low. And, one of the clear implications of designing low overpasses, it limits the height of vehicles that can get through. That limits trucks, but importantly, it also limits buses. So if one were to, again, unfortunately and nefariously, try to design a highway in a way that would be exclusionary and prevent those who would use public transportation from getting to that location and require the use of private vehicles, then one might design it, unfortunately, with low overpasses. So something as simple and seemingly harmless as a bridge can have huge implications in terms of the systemic racism that unfortunately our country has faced for hundreds of years and still faces today, as well as class and other forms of discrimination. So Nelson Mandela, in an address to the UN, argued that eliminating the distinction between information-rich and information-poor countries is critical to eliminating the other inequalities between North and South. So it's really important that we think about the ways that, on the one hand, inequities in society are often tied to inequities in access to information and information technology. And on the flip side, how, if they are designed proactively with an orientation toward equity and justice in their design, as well as in how they're distributed, they could actually help to fight against inequities and create a more just and equitable society. So that's our goal. And IT can be part of that solution, but it isn't inherently a solution to that issue. So if you just had IT by itself and you didn't think about the economic, societal, and other aspects of the technology, it might simply widen existing gaps or create new ones. So you have to be very proactive and thoughtful about how you're going to work to build a more just and equitable future through the use of IT. So the real questions in terms of whether technology is good or bad and AI is good or bad, it's for whom and under what circumstances. So this is the complexity and the nuance of the situation, why it's really important. It's really important that your students are thinking about this from a young age. They're thinking about this in K through 12 in high school, thinking about the technologies they might be involved in building, the technologies they're using, the implications and impacts of those technologies, how they might affect people differently based on their different lived experiences and intersectional identities, and how to make sure that technologies can, as much as possible, be a force for good, for justice, and for equity in society. So some quotes, this is from Sergey Brin, who's the co-founder of Google. "A new spring in AI is the most significant development in computing in my lifetime. Every month, there are stunning new applications and transformative new techniques, but such powerful tools also bring with them new questions and responsibilities. So it's important we're thinking about those responsibilities we're actively facing, our role in technology development, and not just waiting to see what happens, but thinking about the impacts of the technology before it's even released and deciding whether or not we should release that technology." So, and similarly, Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, has stated, "For AI to be truly smart, it must respect human values, including privacy. If we get this wrong, the dangers are profound. And what all of us have to do is to make sure we're using AI in a way that's for the benefit of humanity, not to the detriment of humanity." So it's really important, again, that we're very conscious and we're thoughtful about how we're using technology, and that we're using it motivated by the right reasons and to achieve the right goals, the right ends that would produce a more equitable and just society. Joy Buolamwini, who's the founder of the Algorithmic Justice League, had a really compelling, very upsetting and disturbing, but very powerful firsthand experience with technology that she's applied in her work, and to do really amazingly revolutionary work in the AI and social and racial justice space. So she was starting on an art project that involved facial recognition software. So she was using an off-the-shelf facial recognition tool. So somebody would come up to it and it would recognize their face. But because of both the bias inherent in the data set, the fact that the data set did not correctly encompass the full representation of lived experience and embodied experience of human beings, and because of limitations in the input technologies and the cameras, which were designed and tested disproportionately by members of some groups rather than others, when Buolamwini went to test the software, it didn't recognize her face. And so it's really disturbing that this technology, again, as a combination of the bias in the data set that was used to build it and also limitations and bias in the input devices, had this discriminatory, inequitable outcome and didn't work. The most bizarre thing is that she then thought to put on a white mask, and the technology perceived that as being a face. So this is both an incredibly unjust technology as it's currently implemented, and it's also very technologically deficient. So clearly this technology is not accurate. It's not behaving the way it should be performing. So in many cases, when you build a technology to be more just and more equitable, it's also more technically accurate. You're building a better technology. You're building a more robust technology, and factoring in aspects of intersectional identity and lived experience, such as gender, such as race, such as class, sexual orientation, age, ability status, and many other considerations, is not only going to lead to a more just and equitable technology, and also a more technologically robust technology, but it can also open up new avenues to be creative, to innovate in the technological space. So it's really important that we're thinking about the full spectrum of society as we're designing technologies. And that's work that Bulamwini has been leading ever since. So she argues, I'm optimistic there's still time to shift toward building ethical and inclusive AI systems that respect our human dignity and rights by working to reduce the exclusion overhead and enabling marginalized communities to engage in the development and governance of AI. We can work toward creating systems that embrace full spectrum inclusion. So the message that Bulamwini is sharing here is that there are many different things that we need to do to improve technology design and make sure that it works for everyone. And one aspect is representation in technology design teams. So it's really important that our STEM workforce and our technology design teams represent and reflect society, represent this country and the world. So it's really important that we broaden participation in STEM and broaden participation in IT. So there's it's something that here at UT Austin we definitely believe in strongly, and we're working hard to improve representation and participation. But it's something that we all need to actively work in academia, in industry, as well as in government and nonprofits, making sure that we have a very robust STEM workforce that also has broad participation and representation. And similarly, Pratyusha Kalluri argues, don't ask if AI is good or fair, ask how it shifts power. Those who could be exploited by AI should be shaping its projects. So Kalluri is arguing that it's really important that we're thinking about who's going to be most impacted by the technology and designing for them. This is a problem that I've been thinking about for quite a while. So this goes back to the start of my doctoral studies back in the prior millennium in 1999. I started working first as a graduate research assistant on a summer project prior to starting my graduate studies. And so we're working on early AI and specifically how users would engage with that AI. So in a couple of articles in Communications of the ACM, we first made a theoretical argument, then collected data that helped to validate that. So if you have an AI-based system and you have a user, so in this case, the example that we use is a pension manager. And so this user has been a pension manager making investments for, say, retired automobile factory workers for 20 years, has this wealth of experience and expertise from first education and then from all that work experience, and has been relying on that expertise. And now this pension manager is given an AI-based system. But if the AI-based system is designed as a black box, if it's designed to be opaque, if it doesn't explain the rationale behind the recommendations that it's making, then it can put this pension manager in a really problematic situation. So if the system is right and the user chooses to follow it, which I should say, if the user chooses to follow and the system is right, because given that it's a black box, there's no real way the user can make an informed trust judgment. The user will simply have to decide first whether or not to trust the technology and then find out later if it was right or not. Basically, now it's taken away the agency and the power of the user, and now they're just an implementer. If they go against it, choose to go against it, and it turns out the system was wrong and they were correct to go against it, they might still be criticized as being a risk taker. Okay, you were right. You were correct this time to not trust the AI-based system, but it's usually right. So, you really need to watch out and take that recommendation. If they choose to follow and the system is wrong, they can be seen as incompetent because accountability with technology is not a fully settled space. And there's so many people involved in building these AI-based systems, so many people involved in building the data sets and selecting the data sets used to train these systems and to test these systems. So it's much easier to blame this user, unfortunately. And if the user decides to go against and the AI-based system was right, then it's going to be presented as the user was irresponsible to not follow this correct AI-based system. So basically, again, it prevents the pension manager from making informed trust judgments. It takes away the agency of the pension manager and puts them in a really difficult situation. So it's really important that we think about the implications for different stakeholders in the process. So if we think about the stakeholders who are involved, you first have the basic researchers who are doing cutting edge research in AI. You then have app developers who would take those latest algorithms and apply them into potentially consumer facing or other forms of apps. You'd have purchasers, at least in the pension case. It's not likely that the pension manager got to choose what system they were using. Somebody, likely a manager of them, got to make that choice. So the purchasers are not always going to be end users. And we all know how that works out when other people design highways for us. And then the end users, who again are used, basically in many cases, like the pension manager, forced to use that system that was purchased by the purchaser, that was developed by the app developers based on the research of the AI researchers. And then, of course, in that pension manager example, we also have all the pensioners who are depending and relying on the decisions made by that pension manager and the pension managing company in order to safeguard their retirement and make sure that the money that they've worked hard to earn over their careers is able to sustain them and give them a healthy and very fulfilling retirement. These pensioners, they may not even be aware that the system is being used. So there may be people who are affected by AI-based systems who aren't even aware of its use. This happens in the case of, so there's Cathy O'Neill's Weapons of Math Destruction, has a really compelling example of when people apply to jobs at big box stores, that they may assume that it's only going to be reviewed by humans when their application, but it turns out often applications are pre-screened by AI-based systems. So there may be AI involved in making decisions about which applicants to interview and potentially which applicants to hire. So the use of AI in HR is really important and not always understood by the applicants themselves. So we use this and this importance of transparency to build educational content, such as educational cases. And specifically, this is a case where we envisioned a future mission to Mars. We like to use very forward-looking cases. And so the prior example that I gave on transparency, we did NSF-funded field research in corporate, academic, and government labs. And then we applied that into the classroom through funding from the NSF, Ethics, Education, and Science and Engineering program. And so we laid out a scenario where you'd have, and the key thing here in this case-based design is that our cases are multi-role cases, and the decisions made by one stakeholder affect another stakeholder. So there's a NASA division director, there's a NASA program manager, and there's a NASA astronaut. And so first, the division director faces this dilemma, whether to implement emergency systems as decision support systems or to implement as recommender systems. So for the sake of argument in this case, we'll choose the recommender system case because that's what's going to set up the transparency challenge here. If the decision support system was chosen, it would set out a different set of ethical dilemmas. So this allows the students to be able to experience and see the degree to which ethical decision-making is contingent, and it's a collaborative activity because your ethical decisions they have impacts and implications for others and shape the decisions that others face. And in turn, you are shaped and impacted by other people's ethical decisions. So now the program manager faces, do they use a black box system that's 99.9% accurate or a transparent system that's 99.5% accurate? So you may have heard about deep learning and the use of neural nets in AI, and you can build extremely powerful, extremely accurate algorithms using deep learning. The trade-off is that typically not even the system developers can really explain the logic behind that algorithm. It doesn't follow human logic. So you can, if you're using a rule-based system, it may be less accurate, but at least it can be explainable. So which of these situations do you want? And if you're very paternalistic and you think you know better than the user, you want to do what's best for the user, then you might choose the black box system. But if you're really conscious about safeguarding the agency of the user, you want to empower the user to make their own decisions, then you're going to choose the transparent system. So say you use the transparent system, and then eventually this would allow the user to make an informed trust judgment in the scenario where the emergency system reports there's a malfunction halfway to Mars, and you have to figure out as astronauts what you're going to do. So we're at a really important critical time in computing. And so it's a lot of people are drawing parallels to the start of the atomic era and the impact that the community in physics had on that. So this is a quote from J. Robert Oppenheimer, who was one of the heads of the Manhattan Project at the time, I believe, when they tested the first atomic bomb. We knew the world would not be the same. A few people laughed, a few people cried. Most people were silent. I remember the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him, takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another. So atomic power has tremendous ability, unfortunately, to kill thousands or millions of people, potentially billions, if you have as many nuclear weapons as there are in the world today. So ever since the creation of the atomic bomb, the world has never been the same. And we now have this hanging over us, this possibility of nuclear war, which is a terrifying prospect. And as AI becomes more and more a part of our everyday lives, as we travel in vehicles that are increasingly automated, certainly airplanes, much of the operation of airplanes is an autopilot, so it's powered by AI. It really does mean that AI is becoming a life or death situation. It does have tremendous impacts on the world. It's really important that we think carefully. So one of my favorite quotes from Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park, from Ian Malcolm, actually, Crichton had a sort of fictional affiliation of Ian Malcolm as being affiliated with UT Austin. So kind of a fun fictional affiliation, but famously quoted, "Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think about if they should. So as we're innovating in the AI space, and it doesn't mean that innovation is bad and that we shouldn't innovate. It just means that we need to think carefully about what choices we're making, how we're innovating, and not just let the possible guide what we do, but also think about what those implications and consequences of AI will be, and try to make sure that we're designing AI that will make the world a better, more just, and more equitable world to live in. So good systems, which is one of the 3 Bridging Barriers Grand Challenges, is working to ensure the needs and values of society drive the design of artificial intelligence technologies. Our collaborating units within good systems represent and span the entire 40 acres. So over 30 different departments, schools, and units. And actually, I think there are a few missing here, unfortunately. So we've had some new additions even since this slide. So it's quite a broad spectrum of the campus, including the School of Information, the I School, where I'm my home unit. But you can see here, of course, TAC and computer science, but you can also see Dell Medical School, Macomb School of Business, the Moody College of Communication, the College of Education, College of Liberal Arts, Center for Transportation Research, UT Libraries, a wide range of collaborating units in good systems. That's the exciting aspect of the interdisciplinary research that we're doing. And some of the projects that I've had the good fortune to get to work with some fabulous collaborators on include understanding how African American and Latinx youth evaluate their experiences with digital assistants, privacy preferences and values for computer vision applications, smart cities should be good cities, AI, equity, and homelessness, and a new core research project that we're launching in September 2021, making smart tools work for everyone. And speaking of things that are launching in fall 2021, the School of Information, the I School here at UT Austin, is launching a new, both a BA and a BS in informatics. And so it's a human-centered approach to data, information, and technology. We have some really exciting core courses as part of this. One that's near and dear to my heart is Ethical Foundations for Informatics. Actually having a required ethics course has gained a lot of buzz across the campus, and it's seen as a really important step for a STEM major, an IT-oriented major, to have that built-in focus and requirement on ethics. Of course, also programming, statistics, research methods. And then another course that I'm very proud of is Academic Success in the Digital University. And this course is designed to level the playing field and make sure we have so many wonderful, amazing IT and information resources here on the campus of UT Austin. We want to make sure every student is empowered to be aware of and to make best use of those resources. So that really makes sure that everyone, including first-generation college students, are able to take full benefit of the resources and make sure that they serve everyone. And we're launching with the first 2 concentrations we're launching with are in human-centered data science and user experience design. We're really excited. We're expecting the 3rd one, which is also attracting a lot of buzz across campus, and something that's also near and dear to my heart, is social justice informatics, making sure that IT is going to lead to a more just and equitable society. And then we'll be launching in health informatics, in social informatics, and cultural heritage informatics in the coming months and years. So we're really excited about the new informatics major. And we think that for high school students all across Texas and beyond, that informatics can be an awesome program that can both lead to excellent job prospects and high beginning salary, as well as great potential for career advancement, and also to very fulfilling work that speaks to students' commitments and allows them to work to make the world a better, a more just, and a more equitable place. So thank you for bearing with me, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions that you might have. So I'm looking forward to the Q&A, but thank you so much.